You are light, you are God, you are already immortal consciousness. This is the core experience of near-death experiences. In the darkness of death, in the night, in the winter solstice darkness, the light waits. And the light is a true being. It has always been that way. Anyone who has been in the light in near-death experiences and has become completely light no longer wants to go back to their darkened, tightly fenced cultural identity made up of 1,000 roles and set pieces that are in conflict with one another and that have veiled their own light for their whole life. Christmas is a celebration of identity. Light is the ancient metaphor for consciousness, and darkness is the metaphor for being unconscious. Imagine owning a castle, but no one tells you. Such unconscious possession is of little use to you. Likewise, imagine you are light, but your head and heart feel dull and dark, and your body feels heavy. For the mystics, fewer therefore constitute a question of content, which gives you even more content for your head, and perhaps makes it even more difficult. So mysticism is less a question of content, and conveying even more content. And mysticism, as an educational process, was not a catalogue of performance requirements. That meant you had to develop even more skills. Maybe even now additional spiritual competence. Education is primarily about mysticism, about re-education, about developing from malformations, about extensive transformation. When educated, people should be shaped into their original image. The mystics called this educational goal theosis, the deification of man. Your goal on earth is to become divine. In this respect, the saying of Bishop Athanasius the Great from the 4th century is a Christmas sentence. God became human so that we could become divine. Something like this was still being preached in the 4th century. Jesus speaks of being born again of water and the Spirit. The mystics speak of the birth of God in humans. The original symbol for the birth of God is Mary, the Theotokos. That's what the Orthodox Christians call them. For her, Mary is the person who became aware of God's indwelling and who brought God into being. Every monk and mystic wants to do the same as Mary. Whoever gave birth to Christ 1,000 times in Bethlehem and not in you, you remained lost, as the mystic Angelus Silesius almost summed up the Christmas message. With this mystical core message of the divine nature of every human being, the Christmas message was met with little peace. King Rhodes immediately saw a rival in Jesus, the divine child who had arrived on earth. In short, he had all the male babies in Bethlehem killed in order to completely eradicate the divine line of human development. You can read it in the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 2, verse 16. Herod and other rulers do not like people who are aware of their own greatness and perhaps infect others. They would then develop other forms of society, not so hierarchical, more network-like. The pregnant Maria sums up the consciousness revolution. She says or even sinks, dethrones the mighty and exalts the lowly. From the perspective of the Christmas person, most people are still pretty much in the dark when it comes to the question of their true nature and meaning in life. They are largely unaware of most of what is going on within them. It remains obscure and hidden to them what they think, what they feel, and what motives they really have for acting. And hardly anyone teaches them to develop their true nature and to become free from all forms of manipulation. Christmas is a process and not an isolated celebration. It is a process of becoming light, as the sun rises higher and higher again after Christmas. It doesn't do that at the push of a button. The festival of light and becoming light is inherent in every person at birth. Psychologist Abraham Maslow summarizes the Christmas message with the phrase, "Heaven is within you." Heaven is the evolutionary potential inherent in every human being. The transcendence that the medieval church splits off from man is therefore not otherworldly. Transcendence is not in another eon or in a former paradise garden or in a future heavenly kingdom or on a utopian star, for example, in heavenly dreams. The otherworldly is merely that which is separated from the dominant culture. According to the mystics, it should live in people again and be developed from there. God, that is the potential that lies hidden in every human being. Jesus speaks of the treasure in the field that lies buried underground. Everyone has this treasure. That is the gospel. The good news is that Christmas initiates a new stage of development in you and in humanity when you really understand it. Actually, it would be the job of the churches to tell people this by Christmas at the latest. But they served the rulers for too long, starting around the 4th century, and distorted the message. The mystics live among the guardians of the Christmas lights, and they keep the churches alive. The core messages of Christmas from the perspective of mystics are: you are more than you believe. You are more than you see. You are more than you know. Salvation is not out there. Jesus is your original story. You are full of light. Being, you are like Him, true light, from true light, true God from true God. This is what Christians confess in the particularly solemn creed, the so-called Nicerno Constantinopolitanum. You are God's, Jesus says to the people in the Gospel according to John chapter 10 verse 34. Even Paul does not see Jesus as the only born, but as the firstborn of many. According to Paul, Jesus is our prototype. In Greek, protos ketaleos anthropos. He is the original and target man. He is your prototype, and you should go into series. Jesus restores the archetype of man. He makes it visible. He brings the potential hidden in every person to full view. The Christian mystic and master Paisios from the monastery Mount Athos in Greece also said, "This supernatural is not supernatural. It is inherent in every human being, only the people in the West have made the decayed state of human beings the norm. This is the only reason why a fully developed person who can perform so-called mystical abilities and miraculous deeds like Paisios appears to them. When they meet such a developed person who appears to them as not normal, as transcendent, or as supernatural, or somehow dangerous." By the way, Paisios didn't live in the Middle Ages, but from 1924 to 1994. What did you find out about people like that in the mainstream media? Did you read anything about him in the Time magazine, or was there a daily special about him in Chrismon? Or did you mostly hear about idiots, violent criminals, crazy people? Then you see the values of that culture, which is newsworthy. You have to find out from people who show you that it is possible to live and develop these gifts within you. That's the point of the so-called holy stories, not that you worship them, but that they inspire you. From the mystic's point of view, Christmas is not a family celebration, but rather a celebration of individuation. It's about the individual reflecting completely on themselves, becoming fully aware of themselves, and discovering the divine light, the true light, the divine source, the super clear consciousness within themselves. And becoming light then means increasingly cultivating and living this new light with self-confidence. Only then has the individual arrived home. This is your original home, and only then can your other family home no longer deform you. The Christian monks talk about habitere secum being at home as their goal. It's about the deep peace of inner peace. Only then will you not divide and cripple yourself to fit in, only to find a crippling home. Stop. Where are you running? Heaven is within you. Are you looking for God elsewhere? So you miss him forever. The theologian, doctor, and mystic Angelus Silesius draws on a statement from Jesus for this aphorism. And Jesus says, "You will not say, 'Here or there is the kingdom of heaven,' for see, the kingdom of God is within, in you." In Greek, entos, in you. Gospel according to Luke chapter 17, verse 20 and following. Angelos Silesius lived from 1624 to 1677. In near-death experiences, aligning with the highest potential breaks through spontaneously. This is mysticism for lazy people or super grace. The near-death experience is the mystical wild card. This birth of God, the Christmas that he wants to tell, can also happen in the middle of everyday life. It happens when we no longer give in to the pressure of false expectations and allow our archetype to finally take shape within us. The psychologist Abraham Maslow examined such spontaneous mystical breakthroughs in the middle of everyday life, but Abraham Maslow died in 1970. According to Maslow's research, mystical peak experiences are human essence experiences. In his opinion, they are available to every person and, on top of that, every person needs them so that they can become completely healthy and truly develop into their adult, mature form. Maslow says peak experiences are not limited to marginalized people, monks, saints, or yogis, Zen Buddhists, Orientals, or people in a special state. Peak experiences are not something that occurs in the Far East, in special places or among a specially trained or chosen people. You find Siddhi right in the middle of life. They happen to everyday people in everyday jobs. According to Maslow, access to such peak experiences is not simply tied to spiritual exercises such as silence and meditation. They happen, and this is also the goal of mysticism and coaching. They happen under certain conditions in the middle of everyday life. Again, I give the floor to Abraham Maslow. Heaven is everywhere around us. In principle, it is always available. He is ready to be entered for a few minutes, first anywhere, in the kitchen, at work, or on a basketball court. Wherever perfection can happen, where a means becomes an end, or where a job has been done really well, the life of all-round connection is more attainable than ever dreamed of. And Maslow says of his own research on such peak experiences, the second big lesson I learned was that this was a natural experience, not a supernatural one. And I gave up the term mystical experiences and instead called them peak experiences. They can be studied scientifically. They are within the reach of human knowledge and are not eternal mysteries. They are in the world, not outside the world. Not just priests do them, but all of humanity. Mystical experiences no longer represent objects of faith, but rather open themselves to human exploration and knowledge. So much for Maslow. And he pointed out that peak experiences can change a person's worldviews and character. He says to have a clear perception that the universe is one piece and that you have your place in it, that you are part of it, that you belong to it. This experience can be so profound and shattering that it changes the person's character and worldview forever. Maslow says that a summit experience is a visit to heaven. He says, I love the metaphor for the peak experience, that it is a visit to a personally defined heaven from which one returns to earth, that it exists at all times for everyone around us, and that one enters it at least for a little while can. A summit experience is accompanied by a changed perception, and it enables changed forms of perception. Again, I give the floor to Maslow. It is the truest and most total way of visual perception or hearing or feeling. In part, it comes from a particular change in attitude that can best be described as a non-examining, non-comparing, non-judgmental insight. This is to say that figure and reason are not clearly distinguished. For example, there is a tendency for things to be ranked equally important, rather than in a ranking of important and unimportant. For example, the mother looks at her newborn baby by looking at every detail and being enchanted by it. Then she lives a kind of total, non-comparative acceptance. Quote end. Peak experiences, according to Maslow, require a more objective view that is not tunneled by subjective needs. Man, you no longer relate what you experience to your own worries or needs, but rather you are objective without need. Maslow says that we normally perceive everything in terms of human concerns, and especially our own self-centered concerns. In peak experiences, however, we do not cling. We become more objective, more able to perceive the world as if it were independent, not just by the perceiver, but as if nature in and of itself could be seen. You can see them in their own right and as an end in themselves rather than as something to be used. Quote end. After all, if you want to have a summit experience of this kind, then it requires a receptive attitude and, above all, lack of ease and desire. Maslow describes it like this: the knowledge of the values of being, of the values of goods in the peak experience, is more passive and receptive, more humble than normal knowledge. It is more willing and able to listen because the perceiver is less motivated to do something. That is, to be aware of the lack of rubbish, the lack of desire, the lack of need approaches. He also expects less of himself in such moments. We must remember that the gods are generally viewed as having no needs or desires, no deficits, no faults. They delight in all things. In this sense, the unmotivated person more into the image of God. So much for Maslow. The everyday sense of time and space also loses its narrowness and expands into a comprehensive belonging. Maslow explains it like this: in the summit experience, a very characteristic disorientation with regard to time and space takes place, up to and including loss of awareness of time and space. In positive terms, this corresponds to the experience of universality and eternity. Just remember, you are the treasure, and do everything you can to become aware of yourself.